You added a reference to the mailmodule.dll class library in Lesson 1.2. You then saw that the IntelliSense menu provides useful information about the methods and properties of the class library. This was only possible because I created an XML documentation file to accompany the mail module class library, but this doesn't happen by default. Without an XML documentation file, none of the XML summary information would have been displayed in the IntelliSense menu. When you create a class library, you should always include summary information for each property and method, along with an accompanying XML documentation file. This will make the class easier to work with by programmers that use the library. Summary information was covered in depth in Session 7 of the Essential Skills course in this series. You will create a class library of your own in Lesson 4.4. You'll rarely find it useful to manually inspect the contents of an XML documentation file, but you'll examine one in this lesson to understand how it works. To begin, open the Joe's Bar web application project from your Sample Files folder. And view the properties of the project. To do this, right-click Joe's Bar web application in the Solution Explorer and click Properties from the shortcut menu. You're now going to change the Build options to generate an XML documentation file. Click the Build tab on the left and check the XML documentation file box in the Output group. Whenever the project is built, an XML documentation file will now be created in the Bin folder. Build the project now. To do this, right-click Joe's Bar web application in the Solution Explorer and click Build from the shortcut menu. Next, you're going to view the XML documentation file that was generated. Click File, Open File. Now open the Bin folder, click Joe's Bar web application.xml and click Open. The XML documentation file opens in Visual Studio. There are many other programs capable of opening XML files, but opening the file with Visual Studio will ensure that you see the same thing shown in this lesson. XML isn't actually a programming language. It's really a standard for storing information. For example, HTML code is a form of XML. XML always works as a series of nested tags enclosed in less than and greater than symbols, which open and close in the same way as HTML tags. XML documentation files use different tags to HTML, but basically work in the same way. Because XML can be used to store any kind of value in a hierarchy, it's an extremely versatile way to store data. XML is covered in greater depth in Session 3 of the Essential Skills course in this series. Now let's examine the XML documentation file. First, you can see a tag called Assembly, which contains the name of the project's base class. The base class is the class that contains all of the other classes in the project. Next, you can see a Members tag. This tag contains separate member tags for every class, property, and method in the project, including any ASP.NET controls. The third Members tag contains the text box email address control on the default.aspx page. You can tell that this control is on the default.aspx page by looking at the name property. The full path to the control is _default.textbox email address. In the Essential Skills course in this series, you learned that each ASPX page has an underlying class. Visual Studio's compiler sees the default.aspx page as the _default class. Note that if you rename a page without renaming its underlying class, the page's class name may no longer match its file name. For this reason, it is best to avoid renaming ASPX pages, if at all possible. Next, open the mailmodule.xml file. Click File, Open File, click mailmodule.xml, and click Open. This XML documentation file provides the IntelliSense information for the Mail Module class library that you used in Lesson 1-2. Close Visual Studio now, and you've now completed Lesson 1-8, Create an XML documentation file.